Last night, we all learned that renowned fashion journalist and former creative director for Vogue magazine, André Leon Talley, passed away at the age of 73. Tributes have been pouring in all across the country as well as the globe. He was an iconic figure, a 6'6" man who hailed from North Carolina, who brought his amazing knowledge of fashion, but also his race into a place that in elite circles where it's mostly been white folks who have been controlling what you see and what you hear. He brought that. Of course, he was someone who dressed First Lady Michelle Obama, offered advice, mentored Naomi Campbell, had an impact on so many people in a tremendous way. We've got a number of folks who are lined up to pay tribute to André Leon Talley. First up is Robin Givhan, Pulitzer Prize winning writer for The Washington Post. Robin, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Roland?
Great. Always good to see you. So just share with us just your thoughts about André, who he was, what was it like to be around him in his company, and just his impact on fashion.
Well, I mean, André was one of a kind for so many years. He was alone at the level of status of creative director at a major fashion glossy, particularly American Vogue, which I should mention has not had a Black person at that level since André. And he was someone who had an astonishing knowledge of European history, the history of fashion. That's one of the things that editor-in-chief of American Vogue, Anna Wintour, once said about him, that he sort of balanced her out because while she was adept at sort of the business side of fashion and certainly the popular culture side of fashion, he really understood the context and the history of it. To some degree, even more so than the very people who were the gatekeepers when he first came to fashion. So his loss is really a loss of an incredible amount of institutional knowledge. And it's the loss of someone who really opened doors in ways that can be seen by the numbers of Black models who are now working and by the presence of a Black editor-in-chief at British Vogue.
And he had to, and the reality is he had to deal with the issue of race in this field, not just in the magazine industry, but the fashion industry itself. And so someone had to walk through those doors and he had to confront it head on.
Yeah, I mean, I think people don't really sort of understand just how different the industry was back when he started in the 70s. I mean, it really was an industry that was dominated by white socialites and people who had sort of aristocratic background and what we now would refer to as sort of limousine liberals. I mean, he really was this sort of odd duck, this tall, skinny Black kid from the segregated South. And what I think is especially striking is that he came into this world armed with intelligence, armed with his faith that had been instilled in him by his grandmother who raised him and who he was devoted to. But he also had an incredible amount of optimism and just joy in the glamour and wonder of fashion. And despite, all of the issues that he had to deal with, whether we'd call them microaggressions now, back then it was just daily life. He overcame it. He shrugged it off. I'm sure he had to internalize some of it, and it was quite difficult, but he continued to move forward, and he never let those barriers stand in the way of what he ultimately wanted to accomplish.
Last question for you. I never got a chance to actually meet André. I don't think our paths crossed, but everything that I've read, documentaries the documentary that I've seen, this is somebody who also absolutely loved life to the fullest and had a ridiculous sense of humor.
André was majestic and imperious and funny and cutting. And when he decided that he was going to open his heart to you and be generous, he gushed forth with a kind of generosity that just made you feel that you had been seen by the world.
All right, Robin Givhan of the Pulitzer Prize winner, Washington Post. We certainly appreciate you joining us, sharing your thoughts about the passing of André Leon Talley.
My pleasure.
Folks, this was the statement from Anna Wintour, the leader at Vogue. The loss of André is felt by so many of us today. The designers he enthusiastically cheered on every season and who loved him for it. The generations he inspired to work in the industry. Seeing a figure who broke boundaries while never forgetting where he started from. Those who knew fashion and Vogue simply because of him, and not forgetting the multitude of colleagues over the years who were consistently buoyed by every new discovery of André's, which he would discuss loudly and volubly. No one could make people more excited about the most seemingly insignificant fashion details than him. Even a stream of colorful faxes and emails were a highly anticipated event, something we all look forward to. Yet it's the loss of André as my colleague and friend that I think of now. It's immeasurable. He was magnificent and erudite and wickedly funny, and mercurial too. Like many decades-long relationships, there were complicated moments, but all I want to remember today, all I care about, is the brilliant and compassionate man who was a generous and loving friend to me and to my family for many, many years, and who we will all miss. Folks, Antthony Mark Hankins is a fashion designer. Of course, I've met Antthony when we were in Dallas. He's now, Antthony, where are you? You in LA? I saw you with your aunt in Savannah, Georgia, posting all the photos and videos. So where are you these days?
I'm in Savannah, Georgia. I moved here about 6 months ago.
Wow.
I'm enjoying it.
Wow.
Moved for me.
Gotcha. All right. Well, good. Now I know that. So when I roll back through Georgia, I'll certainly stop by. Share with us just your thoughts, interactions, perspective about the icon himself, André Leon Talley.
Well, as a fashion designer, André was more than just an editor. He was a friend and a confidant, someone that designers could go to as a safe place for feedback. And I think a lot of times, when a fashion designer is presenting a collection, they're afraid of what the press will say. André was the kind of person that would come in through the back door, look at your designs, and talk to you one-on-one. And Marc Jacobs and Donna Karan and so many of my colleagues would say that he was a friend. And when you're a timid designer, you're putting together a collection, you're really unsure what to present. And like Robin was saying, he was an encyclopedia of fashion. He knew about every trend. He could take you back to the Doric peplos and Grecian culture. And he was so personable. I remember when I first met him at Yves Saint Laurent, he was with Eunice Johnson of Ebony, Ebony magazine.
Yep.
And Eunice Johnson and André were hand in hand going from couture show to couture show. And André took the time to talk to me, and he didn't have to. And so as a young designer back then, I remember that. And I remember the smile on his face and the eye-to-eye contact he gave me. And if you look on Instagram, so many fashion designers around the world had that intimacy with André. Winona Blahnik, Yves Saint Laurent was a personal friend of his. Karl Lagerfeld made clothes for him. I mean, he was bigger than life, loving and caring. And as Diane von Furstenberg said today, she felt as though she lost her brother. And he was a brother to all designers.
When you say bigger than life, first of all, his brother was 6'6". And of course, I mean, later in life, he talked about his struggle with weight, then the different type of outfits that he later began to wear, the caftans and others. And you're right, you would sit there and you would listen, again, when I watched the documentary, how he would just sort of just describe this outfit and the shoes and where it came from and where it first started. I mean, and so you're sitting here and again, listening to someone dissect clothes, sort of like when you watch a coach dissect a play in sports.
Absolutely. And what's really loving about him is that he embraced his stature. He embraced his size. He didn't shame himself because he was a fuller figure guy. He really embraced fashion no matter, before, size shaming was in fashion. He really stepped up and showed how you could be a full-figured man and look elegant. And he has such a flair for color and texture. And I used to say to him, you could have been a fashion designer. He says, no. I love books too much. He did. He read all the greats from Shakespeare. He could recite a Shakespeare poem. I mean, that's how intelligent this man was. And like Robin said, we lost a leader. He opened doors for so many African Americans. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for André and Willie Smith And, Diane Vreeland gave him the opportunity to work at the Met. But Andre showed up. And I tell young people, when you show up hungry and willing to learn and not the first one out the door, Andre would be the last one out the door back in the day when he was working for Madame Vreeland. So, that's what it takes to get to that level, doing your homework, showing up. And Andre put in the time. And it didn't happen overnight for him. And he really, really dedicated his life to what he loved. And that's why he was a true success.
Well, and that's also why it's important for us to really understand and respect the work that people put in, how they got there, but also creating the space for the next generation. Because as Robin said, he comes in at a time where you did not have African Americans who were at any of these magazines, in these spaces. And even though he ascended, he still dealt with a lot of the BS, even in terms of no longer having the position at Vogue. You would think that someone of his stature would have never sort of left one of those places, but even he still had to deal with sort of being pushed out, pushed away, but he never stopped that from letting everybody know, I still got a place in this game.
Exactly. It's really, really lovely, his relationship with Diane Vreeland. I hope our people will go and research Andre and learn about his, he was really charming. And that Southern charm took him all the way to the top. And, you can come from anywhere in the United States, but there's something really special about the South. His grandmother was a hard-working woman. She cleaned bathrooms. And he said she wore a diadem in his mind. When he looked at his grandmother, he didn't see her as a cleaning lady. He saw her as a princess, as a queen, as royalty. And it's something that we take from our African-American women, from our grandmothers and our mothers who are strong, our aunts who are strong. And we carry that, that sense of knowing who we are, our faith value into the workplace. We don't need to leave that back at home. We need to take that with us when we go to work. All the things that our grandmothers and our mothers instilled in us, we need to use that every day, because that's what's going to get you to the next level in life. And the top of all your dreams is by listening to your grandmothers, and having that faith system instilled in you, carrying it with you all the way. All
right, fashion designer Antthony Mark Hankins. And also, I wore the right outfit for today. That wasn't planned.
You look fabulous.
I had this made when I was in Ghana, so I had to go ahead and rock this one. I should have wore the full length one in honor of Andre with the outfits that he wore. Antthony Mark Hankins, good to see you, man. I hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much for having me. Take care, Roland.
Thanks a lot. All right, folks, let's now go to Teri Agins. She's a longtime fashion writer, been in the business for quite some time, and also Brandice Daniels. She is the CEO, founder of Harlem Fashion Rogue. Glad to have both of you. How y'all doing?
Hi, Roland. Great to see you.
Absolutely.
And wow, what a day. I think about, when I think about Andre, I probably have known him the longest, because we started working, when I started working at Fairchild Publications at DNR in 1977, I was the only Black female reporter there, and he was the Black reporter at Women's Wear Daily. He was a European editor, and I was in the Chicago Bureau. I happened to be in New York. He was in town. Andre blew through the office, and he was, he had on the Savile Row suit, and he was just impeccable, and I was so nervous and in awe. And he had that really grand way of talking, hello, and nice to meet you. And he also welcomed me very warmly, happy to see me, welcomed me in, told me I was going to have a great time. And then through the years, I did other jobs, but then when I started working at the Wall Street Journal, and then I started on the fashion beat, that's when our paths collided again. And when I was in Paris doing some research for my first book, The End of Fashion, Andre was holding court at the Ritz Hotel. He actually had an apartment at the Ritz Hotel, paid for by Karl Lagerfeld, and he invited me, come on over and have lunch with me. And so that was a lot of fun. And he was just, he was just a mentor to everyone. And, Andre was glamorous and fun and everything, but I remember him as a reporter. He was an incredible writer, and I really would think a lot of young people, if you really want to see Andre's real genius at a very young age, you go back and look at those features that he did on Yves Saint Laurent and Givenchy in Women's Wear Daily, in the W magazine. At that time, it was a broadsheet. And those stories were not just like a reporter showing up and interviewing a designer. This was a reporter who spoke French, who was steeped in the culture. So you really got this whole sense of, I mean, he really gave you a rich story that was not only about fashion, but design. He was a bon vivant, and all that was in his copy. So those stories were just magnificent.
Brandice?
Yeah, you know, for me, I'm from Memphis, Tennessee. So coming from the South, moving to New York, having this dream of working in fashion, André Leon Talley, like so many other people, stood as a beacon of hope. Because he was from the South, because he was a Black man, and he was in these incredible positions and incredible places, it made me feel like, oh, this is possible for me. And I think that was the sentiment of, you know, every editor friends of mine that I spoke to today over the phone about Mr. Talley, every stylist that I spoke with, everyone had the same sentiment that because he was in his role and in his position, it made us all feel like we could do it too. And I don't know if, you know, André Leon Talley really understands the impact that he had on this next generation of African-American, you know, professionals that are in fashion, but he had an immeasurable impact on all of us.
Mikki Taylor, editor-at-large of Essence Magazine. Mikki, people might hear Andre, they might see him speak and see his whole persona, but this was a North Carolina boy. This was someone who attended North Carolina Central before moving on to study other places as well. Just share with us your reflections, André Leon Talley.
Well, he was an unprecedented human being, a fashion storyteller, an icon who was passionate about fashion, who had a strong sense of self from his Southern humble upbringing, you know, in the Jim Crow South. And, you know, if you look at an André Leon Talley, this is the stuff dreams are made of. But lest anyone forget, he worked hard to get there. He was informed, he was well educated, he spoke meticulous French. And so whether you were talking with him on the front row of fashion in New York or talking with him in Paris and, you know, realizing what an honor it was to be in his presence because he blazed a trail to get there, and a trail that wasn't always welcoming of someone like him. But he was so informed, they couldn't deny him. They couldn't deny his presence, his grandiosity, and even though they may have hated his skin color. And so it was just quite a takeaway. Every time you were in his presence, you were in a master class of information and what it meant to be Black wherever you are in the world. And so I just admired him so. I cherished those moments together and, you know, to just see him even across the floor, hello, Mikki, and just so excited to see one another, especially when you could count those of us in fashion and beauty on one hand that were of African descent. And so today I'm just reflecting on the genius that he was, how he defied the odds, how he mastered his purpose with such distinction in a world and at a time where we were invisible. Just nothing, no one like him, that dashing figure cutting across the landscape. Loved me some Andre.
Teri, I always say you can be present or have presence. I think it's safe to say André Leon Talley had presence.
He absolutely had presence. And he was just someone who inspired us all. And, you know, as a journalist, and I was listening to everyone talk, also be sure to check out Robin's excellent article today in the Washington Post. You really see this is someone who just took command of, you know, anything when he was on a stage, I'm looking at this video here where he's talking on the red carpet to different celebrities. I mean, everyone loved to talk to him because he was so smart. I mean, and you really got, you know, an education in addition to his, you know, his joy of fashion. I mean, this man could talk about, he was a connoisseur of clothing and food and everything that was about fine living. And this was something that we don't see anymore. You're not going to see, this is an end of an era. You're not going to see anyone like this who's got all this. This is not fast fashion. This is the old school couture is really the fascination of fashion, the dream that so many young people have always thought about. And so, you can learn a lot from André. And the main thing that you can learn about, as Antthony Mark Hankins was saying, about showing up, because this is a guy who really worked hard. I mean, he made it look fun and fabulous, but André was an incredibly hard worker. And he came prepared, and that's why he was accepted.
Brandice,
So,
go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, this is just really something that I always like to instill in people, because getting there early, staying late, and, really knowing your subject. And, André did this. And so he'll be missed by everyone.
Brandice, the thing that I think is also important to the point that Teri was just making is that people see these events and they're thinking, oh my goodness, these are just all fun times, but it's also work. And so this was someone who was working, who was not, it wasn't just, hey, we're just at the party. It might look that way in photos and things along those lines, but putting that work in to be able to rise to the level that he did at Vogue and in this industry.
I don't think any of us, Roland, will ever understand the work that André put in to get to the place that he was in. And what I love is, he also mentored so many young designers. I think about Mimi Plange. He was an incredible mentor for her. I remember him being at Laquan Smith's very first fashion show that he had ever had. And just, I wasn't even at that event, but hearing that André Leon Talley was there at Laquan Smith's very first show, I think it made everyone look at Laquan Smith differently and take him a lot more serious. That's how important his presence was for young designers.
Mikki, we talk a lot on this show about opening spaces for African Americans in front of the camera, behind the camera, individuals on boards of directors, but also in the C-suite as well. To the point that Brandice just made, when we're talking about fashion, we're not just talking about those who are on the journalist side, those who are working for the magazines. We also are talking about the individuals who are able to build their companies, to create their empires, to be able to employ hundreds or thousands of people. And so to have an individual who literally had that level of influence, that level of power, and who understood it's not for and no more, or I'm happy to be the only one sitting at the table, because there are some people who look like all of us it is all about just them being the only one. And so he also was deliberate, intentional in saying it can't just be me here.
Exactly. And so he opened the doors for models. He took time to mentor designers. He would come to designer shows that, maybe many of the other white editors wouldn't come to. And because he knew it was important, he knew his presence was important there. And then he would go backstage, and in these bold pronouncements that you're used to hearing him make, he would teach you a lesson. He would pour into that designer. He would make time to meet with that designer back at the showroom or in the studio. And because he had that Southern upbringing, and what those of us who had a Southern upbringing understand is that you crawl before you walk. So if you understood what it took for you to get where you are, you understand the importance of making way for someone else. Let's not forget that when he first came to New York, he volunteered at the Costume Institute with Diana Freeland, stayed there late, was hungry on Christmas Eve. He will tell you about that in a heartbeat, the sacrifices he made. And he did the work that many others would not have done to get where he was. And so it was in his soul to give back, to make deposits into others, because there were those who poured into him either willingly or not. But he never forgot that. For all that grandiosity, I will always say he had both feet on the ground, and he was always intentional about whatever it was that he did.
Teri, final thoughts.
Yeah, my final thought was, I remember when I wrote The End of Fashion, and I wanted Andre to write a blurb on the back of the book. And I wanted him not to just say, oh, this is fabulous or whatever, but I wanted Andre to write a blurb, because I knew that it would be something that would, show his scholarship. He would show the appreciation of the scholarship of the type of work that I was doing. And I just feel like that's what he was about. He was not shallow. This is a man who was very deep and really, and he was so absolutely committed to fashion. I mean, in a way that you really don't see at all. And, we're just going to miss him. We're going to miss, I think the reason why this incredible outpouring today was because we're all remembering how fashion was when we had dress codes and when things were really formal, and, things have gotten very casual now. And I see Andre who's, formal and just fabulous. And today has really touched me as I think back at all those wonderful moments with him. But, rest in peace, great Andre. You're up there with Carl, hanging out with, Manolo, not Manolo, but he was hanging out with all the fashion, Givenchy and Yves Saint Laurent. And, we're thinking about you and remembering you and honoring you.
Brandice, your final thoughts. I do have this real quick before your final thoughts, all three of you. If you knew you were coming across Andre, did you double check to see what you were wearing to make sure everything was straight? Was anybody ever lovingly admonished by Andre?
No.
No, thank God, no.
I was not lovingly admonished, but the last time I saw him was at Dapper Dan's atelier. It was right after they had shown his documentary at the Schomburg, and he was definitely looking and checking and trying to see what we all had on for sure. But he, for us, represented hope. And I think Mikki Taylor said, which, by the way, I'm so honored to be here with Mikki Taylor and Teri Agins,
Likewise.
my biggest supporters, both of them. But he was, he allowed us to dream. I call myself a proud fashion outsider. I didn't work for Vogue. I didn't, come up the luxury ranks. And for someone like me who moved to New York from the South with this dream, Andre's life represented possibility. And that's what it represented for so many of us. So he will be dearly missed. And there's no one who could ever replace his impact.
Mikki.
I agree with everything that has been said. He was quoted once as saying, "None of my contemporaries have seen the world through the Black lens." And when I think about him, and with all the throws, if you will, that were against him on every continent, as a Black man, as a man who was informed, as a man who you had to try to reckon with to at least hold your own. I remember John Fairchild, when he worked at Women's Wear Daily, John Fairchild turned to him one day and said, "I'm the boss." He told Andre that because he was threatened by the presence and the knowledge of Andre. So, yeah, I'm bowing in spirit to all that he was, to what he stood up against, to be all that. And he is forever a symbol of the achievable possibilities, as Brandice said. So we have no chance at the win if we don't use our voice and if we don't stand up in all our splendor like Andre did.
Well, that is certainly a proper way to to pay tribute to André Leon Talley, and one of the reasons why we've done this. We've done these for numerous African Americans who passed away, and because, frankly, as far as I'm concerned, when Sidney Poitier passed, Cicely Tyson passed, I personally did not think that we saw the proper tributes being paid. And in fact, last night I was talking to one of my former colleagues at TV1, and if there's something that really probably drives me crazy, is that the state that we're in right now with black media is that when we're losing our icons, our perspectives are not fully being presented. So 20, 30 years from now, when somebody is reading about André Leon Talley or Sidney Poitier and they're looking on YouTube or they're looking in different places, they're actually not going to see our real-time reflections, because unfortunately too many of our outlets are just doing business as usual and not taking the time to actually pay proper tribute. And so that's why I thank all three of you for being with us and being able to share your thoughts about André as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Folks, as we said, I mean, all across the world, people have been weighing in, talking about André Leon Talley. Kerry Washington tweeted this: "Oh, André, heaven is going to be too fabulous now, sir. You blessed us with your charm, wit, and taste for the exceptional. You'll shine so brightly from the heavens that we'll know what true stardom looks like. We'll gaze up at you always in awe and with gratitude." Constance White, former top editor at Essence magazine, she tweeted this: "He lit up fashion. He lit up my life in ways he knew and didn't know. He was a giant, an intellect, an iconoclast, a singular personality and talent, a black trailblazer in an unforgiving white fashion world. Rest in peace, André. Rest easy in heaven's chiffon trenches. I'll miss you. Hashtag André Leon Talley." Comedian Liz Winstead posted, "André Leon Talley has passed. I'm heartbroken. He was someone whose heart was as big as his personality. What an icon, what a trailblazer, what a legend, what patriot, what a teddy bear. Rest in power, sir. You will be missed." Those were, again, some of the tributes that have been on social media. Folks have been, again, men and women, have been posting numerous different statements regarding André Leon Talley. As I said, born and raised in North Carolina, grew up in the church, goes to HBCU, North Carolina Central, then goes on to incredible heights in this industry. One of the folks who has been in the fashion industry for quite some time is Harriette Cole. She's a journalist. We actually worked together at Savoy magazine. Harriette, how you doing?
I'm, celebrating our brother's life. It's happy, it's sad, it's everything, but I'm honored to be here with you today.
So talk about that. When did you first meet André, and just share for our audience what was it like to be in his presence?
Well, actually, Roland, I say I've had 39 lives. I started my career at Essence magazine, and I was running the lifestyle department. The art director, Gregory Gray, who's also from Baltimore like me, said, we have to do an at-home feature with this wonderful man, André Leon Talley. So we went to his apartment in Lower Manhattan, a tiny little perfectly appointed dream apartment, with silk curtains. But what was interesting about his apartment, Roland, is that he had two of everything. He had two fabulous coffee table books, but maybe there were 100 of them, but they were in twos. Even back then, he had custom-made Manolo Blahnik shoes, and he had two of everything. So I said, why do you have two? And he had learned, it was either from Jeffrey Bean or Oscar de la Renta, had told him, well, you have to have two. One for town and one for country. And at this point, he didn't have two homes yet, Roland, but he was ready. So when it came time, he could separate those two and have one in the city and one in the country. He was a sponge. He was always learning and always, figuring out what he could apply knowledge-wise to the whole the world of understanding, of culture, of creativity, of style, of potential.
I've told this story several times. I played in the Jeffrey Osborne golf tournament one year. It was rained out. Massive storm came through. And we were sitting at the table, and I was sitting there, and Ahmad Rashad was to my right, Eddie Levert was sitting there, Barry Bonds was sitting there, and Sugar Ray Leonard was sitting there. And we started just talking about the craft. So like I had asked Eddie a question about singing, and when, matter of fact, at Oprah's Legends Ball in the show, she talked about how she went up and told them she only wanted fast-paced songs, and I brought up to Eddie, and he was not happy about that night. And I remember watching him like he pissed. And so I asked him about that particular night, and so we started talking about being on stage and being a Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, and then Ahmad Rashad started talking about, for football, and Barry Bonds started talking about baseball, and Sugar Ray Leonard, and I started talking about television and journalism, and so we're just sitting here trading all of these different stories, and it was great because it literally was a conversation about how do you talk about and define greatness in your particular area.
Yeah.
And so for me, watching the documentary or reading these stories and listening to him talk about fashion, I didn't know what the hell he was talking about, but again, listening to it, you understand someone who did not have a small sense of knowledge on this, but who was a genius in his area, in his lane, in his space.
He was immersed in the space. Now, let's think about this, Roland. We all, Black folks, we have all been taught you have to be 10 times better, right, in order to have whatever the opportunity is in order to build your career. André Leon Talley had exponential knowledge, exponentially more probably than anyone else. He was a French major in college. He lived in France for a long time. What many people don't know is that he started his career at Ebony magazine. He was
really
side by side with Eunice Johnson at the shows in Paris. He brought that Southern sensibility and grounding, which Mikki talked about, having his feet on the ground, into his whole life. But the other thing that he had a vision. He had a dream that was bigger than anyone could shut down. He dreamed about fashion from a kid. He believed that he could build a world for himself that was in this international world of fashion. He studied it. He owned it. He was a big Black man. He brought that size and stature with him as a badge of honor rather than anything that anyone could possibly be ashamed of. And I interviewed him, Roland, a year ago for a show that I do for AARP, Real Conversations with him. He talked about his book, The Chiffon Trenches, his memoir. And what I think is so important about that book, and he's written others, is that he documented behind the scenes, what it was like to navigate in this rarefied air that our dear friend Beth Ann Hardison often says, fashion is an island and most people never get to even get a glimpse into it. Because he wrote this book, because he wrote so much in Vogue magazine, and because he mentored so many people behind the scenes, we have his legacy to live on. And there's one other very important thing I want to say about him as a Southern Black man who was reared by his grandmother. He grew up in the church, and we know that he was very active at Abyssinian for many, many years up until his departure from this earth. What you learn in church, what you learn as a person of God is you are supposed to do good. You're supposed to help others. You are supposed to give as much as you receive and not talk about it. Just do it. André anointed so many people with his knowledge and support, as others have said. He helped many Black people in the industry quietly because, Vogue, wonderful magazine, but Vogue magazine is not a magazine for Black folk.
Nope.
He helped so many Black people have a chance. And talk about inclusivity. He dressed Jennifer Hudson when she was a curvy girl. That was before inclusivity was a thing. And he dressed her for the red carpet. As we know, he was there to support Michelle Obama and so many others behind the scenes to ensure that if there was an opportunity, and they were ready, you had to be ready. If they were ready, he was going to help them have that runway in order to soar. And I think this is something that he will be remembered for. And it's that combination of all the love and faith and grounding that his grandmother and his faith gave him, and his vision that set him on a course to fulfill his dream.
Your funniest André Leon Talley story?
Oh, funny. That's a hard one, Roland, but here's how I'm gonna put it, because I don't necessarily have funny, but I'll say, you had asked earlier, did André ever call people out on how they were dressed?
Mm-hmm.
And I actually saw the opposite. André, I watched him, and even with me, when I would see him places, he would pick something that he liked about what you were wearing and point it out. And one time we were at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in the Egyptian wing, and it was so beautiful, in the Temple of Dender. And I had on a brooch, and I had on like a cape. This is not like his, but I had on a cape and a brooch, and he acknowledged the brooch and, whispered it. "Oh, I love your brooch." And it was something that was my grandmother's. So not funny, but lovely. And I found as cutting as André could be, is as loving and thoughtful as André could be. And he offered me a lot of love and support over the years.
Harriette Cole, we sure appreciate it. Thanks a bunch for just sharing your thoughts with us about we say this a lot. People say this a lot. Hey, who's the next Michael Jordan? Who's the next LeBron James? Who's this? I keep trying to explain to people, there's only one Bill Russell, there's only one Magic Johnson, there's only one Michael Jordan, and there's only one André Leon Talley. You cannot replicate any of that in any way whatsoever.
Yeah. Blessings to you, Roland. Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Folks, we want to thank everybody who joined us. There were so many others we had also reached out to. Many people are still mourning his passing. There's been no cause of death that has been released. TMZ reported that he passed away in a hospital in White Plains, New York, where he was living. And also, a good friend of his who runs the Ford Foundation said that he had had several illnesses recently. But again, André Leon Talley, native of North Carolina Central graduate. Again, fashion icon, legend, renowned fashion journalist, dead at the age of 73. All right, folks, back to our Roland Mark Unfiltered video in just one moment. Folks, Black Star Network is here.
Hold no punches. I'm real revolutionary right now.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America, Roland.
Stay black. I love y'all.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be
black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?